I never thought that a cold afternoon after my father's funeral would be the start of a seismic event in my life. My father, Richard Spencer, was not only a role model, but also a mentor, a companion, and the soul of Spencer Realty Group, a real estate empire built from scratch. After he passed away from a sudden heart attack, I suddenly thought that the greatest loss in my life would be the loss of his job. But I was wrong. 3 days after the funeral, I was summoned to my father's office by his lawyer to hear his wishes. I only expected some savings, an apartment, or a few souvenirs. But then, he laid out the paper and said directly, all legal assets, including the company, real estate, and investments, belong to you, Natalie. No sharing, no joint ownership. I was silent, my heart pounding. The loss had not yet subsided when waves of surprise, responsibility, and pressure came rushing in like a storm. That night, I sat in my old apartment, looking at the pile of documents and the legacy left behind, not knowing whether to cry or to be grateful. Clothes not a bonus. It was trust. It was his last message to me. You are strong enough to keep many things. I never doubted it, until my husband walked into the living room, divided the data on the table, and smiled. Well, it's all ours now. And only at the moment of settlement did I know something was changing. I stepped up from the pile of papers, looking straight at the man I had called my husband for the past 7 years. Derek, when he looked at the product, charming, always knowing how to make me believe he was the perfect partner. But in that moment, when he looked at my father's legacy as if it were a trophy, I felt a fissure begin to form in my heart. We should talk about how to invest this money, Derek said, picking up the bank statement as if he were choosing a meal from a restaurant menu. You know, a vacation home in Malibu, and my mom needs some money to pay for it. I mean, she's sacrificed her whole life for the family. I put my tea down on the table, holding it tightly. My mom didn't raise you. This was your dad's estate, and he left it to you, not to us. Derek laughed, his smile fading. Do you really think people will believe this money is all yours? We're husband and wife, Natalie. In a marriage, everything is shared. Not by design, I said, my voice low but with obvious conviction. And especially when it's clearly, in writing. His expression changed. It was no longer the gentle, thoughtful Derek. It was a cold, calculating gaze. I'm not arguing with you, he said, standing up. I just think we should act like a real family. Not selfishly. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed every email my father had sent me in the last months of his life. One particular message gave me strength. Daughter, I know you're strong enough to hold on to what I've worked so hard to build. But you're also smart enough to recognize who's trying to take it away from you. The next morning, my mother-in-law, Marjorie, showed up at my house with a soft smile and a voice as sweet as honey. Congratulations, Natalie. You deserve it, she said, then added, anyway, I think we should talk about how much we can share with the family, especially since Derek has sacrificed so much for you. I just kept quiet, opening the window. Please give me some time to sort things out. Today's not a good day. She looked at me as if I had stolen her wallet, but I didn't care. When the door closed, I let out a long breath, knowing that the line had been drawn, and that I would protect it at all costs. I began gathering my documents. I changed my email passwords, my bank accounts, my private keys, and transferred the bulk of the plan's assets to a separate signal cascade. No one would know. Not Derek. Not Marjorie. And especially not those who saw me as a gateway to a life of luxury for free. Please let me be clear on one thing: I will not let anyone, not even anyone I have ever loved, steal from me the legacy my father had cleaned with blood and tears. If this is a fight, I am ready. And I will not fight for revenge. I will fight to keep my reputation, and my father's name, to be used as a commodity. I still remember the moment I decided to stop trying to get the good image I had of Derek, or the marriage I had spent my youth nurturing. That morning, when I opened my computer to check my bank account, I discovered something strange: a small withdrawal from an unknown source, made from a secondary card, a card Derek had access to. I checked my recent transactions. The history showed unfamiliar expenses, luxury furniture, a reservation for a sports car, and especially a down payment to a real estate agent, a luxury apartment by the sea, in the name of Marjorie Caldwell. My hand hovered over the mouse. That was when my suspicions became real. They weren't just waiting for my good. Their plan was carefully laid out. They thought I was weak, easily controlled, and above all, they thought I wasn't sober enough to realize the game that was being played behind my back. That same day, I asked Derek out to dinner at a small restaurant in town, public enough that he wouldn't get emotional. When we sat down, I looked straight at him. "I know about the apartment in your mother's name." He paused for just one rule, then went on the defensive. "What are you talking about?" "Your mother, she was just helping me out a little. She's old, she doesn't have any assets to her name, so..." "The assets aren't hers. And the money came from my account," I interrupted, handing him the phone and referring him to the evidence I'd collected. Derek's face paled. In the dim yellow light of the restaurant, his usual smugness had melted away. But he still tried to pull it off. "We're married, Natalie. Why are you acting like I'm an outsider?" "Because I acted like one," I said. "You didn't ask. You had kids, you took money. You made plans with your mother behind my back. This isn't family. This is manipulation." I stood up. "You have 48 hours to get everything back in order. If you don't, my lawyers will be in touch." Tonight, I began preparing for what I never thought I'd have to do: gather evidence, make a second appointment with my lawyer, and set up legal protections to completely separate the inheritance from any connection to Derek. I'd been quiet for too long. I'd been polite, I'd been kind, I'd waited for them to see my worth, my loss. But no. They wouldn't change. And I didn't have time to sit around until I was cut out of my life. By now, I didn't think of this as a marriage. It was an operation. A holding operation disguised as soft smiles, soft kisses, and promises. And I, who had once succumbed to the belief in love, had learned that sometimes love doesn't crack, it simply doesn't exist. I had let them touch everything, but from now on, that wouldn't happen again. Because I wasn't just protecting my assets. I was protecting myself. I never thought I'd have to put a password on the safe in my own house. But just a few days after that confrontation, when Derek started behaving strangely, trying to check my computer, asking about my appointment with my financial advisor, and making a fuss about my spy-like secrecy, I knew I couldn't afford to be complacent anymore. They weren't backing down. They were looking for a way to strike back. God blocked the wrong owners directly before today. I called my lawyer and said straight out, "I'm ready. Let's go." We supported the temporary building order to clear all the shared assets and proposed conditions for the misuse of personal assets. I also requested an independent audit of the last 3 months of accounts, and within days, we had uncovered more evidence that Diane, my mother-in-law, had personally used my supplementary card to purchase furniture for our dream beach house. It wasn't just manipulation. It was systematic misappropriation. She'd lie when the legal papers arrived. Derek was about to explode. He pounded on my door, as angry as I'd ever seen him. How could you do this to my mother? To me? I stood up, my eyes fixed. I didn't do this to you. I did this to protect myself. Because I was too easy. I didn't read. I didn't run. I wasn't the Natalie Spencer of 6 months ago, the one who thought love could resolve all conflicts. I learned that once you let someone cross the line, they don't stop, they go back to the drawing board. That night, I locked out all my accounts. I changed my email, my password, my bank account, all my logins from the corporate system to the internal files I'd shared with Derek. And then the security camera footage was sent to my phone. Diane, once again, was in the house when I was gone. She went straight to my office, checking my desk, opening folders, until she found the envelope containing the sealed contract. I watched every second with the steady keyboard of my phone. She wasn't seeing the truth. She was trying to remove me from the main part of my inheritance from my father. Except I sent the video to my lawyer that night. We'll use this in the building, I texted. My lawyer called back immediately. Natalie, this is strong enough to prove intent to seize and protect privacy. This is no longer a civil dispute. This is serious misconduct. I nodded. No tears. I had no more targets. I was the leader in this battle. The next day, I completed the divorce papers. Clean. Decided. And when Derek received the envelope, for the first time, he was truly silent. No anger, no apology, no reflection on anything. Just one speed that he didn't think I would go that far. They thought I was just angry, that women like me would scream and then second. But I didn't scream. I acted. And that's what scared them the most. From that moment on, I entered a new phase. No more arguing, no more convincing, no more giving in. Just the truth. And the work. The legal battle began quietly, but its effects reverberated in every corner of my life. Just days after the divorce and the order for protection were granted, I began to feel the change in the eyes of those around me, from neighbors, to coworkers, to former friends who always smiled and pretended not to see any injustice. I was no longer the quiet woman standing behind a successful man. I was the woman who had stepped out of the shadow. Derek and Diane didn't stay silent for long. They fought back by filing a division of assets, demanding that I hide my assets and please trust in the marriage. A time of support. But I was not afraid. I had evidence, I had lawyers, and most importantly, I had the truth. Meanwhile, I continued to go to work, running the company I left behind, not for the price, but because it was a legacy worthy of being held in the hands of someone who appreciated it. I began to reorganize the financial planning departments, cutting out the shady relationships that Derek had secretly arranged. I was no longer fighting for myself. I was fighting to protect the values of the deceased, the person who believed that I was worth it all. One morning, I received a handwritten letter from a former employee of my father. He always said she was the next bright light of the company. Don't let them dim that light. I was in tears, not from pain, but from recognition. I knew I had a long way to go. Diane and Derek could continue to play tricks, their money-grubbing lawyers, making up stories to fight for what they didn't deserve. But now, I was no longer defensive. I was moving forward. I had the law on my side, I had righteousness in my hands. And above all, I had myself, a woman who would never give up. There was no designation standard the day the final construction session took place. The gray sky seemed to reflect all the economic pain I had ever experienced. But I was not afraid. I walked into the building that I showed up in a suit that was a shade darker and shoes that my father had once called trustworthy. Every step I took today carried not only legal preparation but also a linguistic declaration. I'm not here to beg for mercy. I'm here to get justice. Derek didn't look at me as I entered the courtroom. Diane was absent. Their lawyers spoke for me, pleading in empty language, blaming me for breaking up the family and reacting to the pain. But I didn't have to shout to be heard. I should pick the store's words, every copy, every recording, every trace of sound that they were secretly stealing my future. When the judge ruled that my father's products were separate property, not to be divided, and that Derek and Diane's microaggressions were not only unethical but also a legal scam, I rolled my eyes for a brief moment. Not to celebrate, but to write. I protected what mattered most of myself. Once I built it, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because there was a new path ahead. A new program with no manipulation, no pretense. Just me, stronger, harder, and more self-made than ever. And for the first time in a long time, I no longer lived to please others. I lived for myself.